13 reasons why people abuse others. They have a disorder. Number one. Number two, they were abused. Number three, they were abused part two. Four, they watched something. Five, they have anger issues. Six, they grew up with an addict or was an addict, right? Seven, they grew up with an addict or they grew up around addicts, right? Seven, they have control issues. Eight, they don't understand boundaries, right? Nine, they are afraid. 10, they lack empathy. 11, they have personality disorders. 12, they are exhausted. 13, they are offensive. In Sarnetta's case, we want to look at number one, that he have some type of psychological order. A small number of the population is antisocial personality disorder, and they're meaning that they're sadistic people. These disorders gain pleasure from seeing others in pain, or even more pleasure when they are the ones inflicting the agony. For example, abuse is a means to an end. They abuse others to gain personal pleasure. So another gains personal pleasure out of psychologically, emotionally, and verbally abusing religious black African American people. Number two, Sarnetta was abused. Some abusers act out their dysfunctional behavior on others because it was done to them. In a subconscious effort to resolve their own abuse, they do the same to others. This type of abusive behavior is identical, meaning it matches also exactly to their childhood experience. Number three, they were abused part two. Sarnetta was abused part two. Just like in the previous explanation, they abused because it was done to them. However, in this case, the victim is the opposite. For instance, the boy who's sexually abused by a man might grow up to sexually abuse girls as evidence that they are not homosexual. The reverse can be true as well. Sarnetta may have watched something. He may have saw people abuse others. You know, with this advanced technology comes additional exposure, even at young ages, to glorified abuse. And Sarnetta, he exposes young people to glorified abuse. He is promoting psychological abuse, and I don't understand why YouTube allows this. You know, some movie songs like the Sarnetta Show, you know, Sarnetta TV, television shows, podcast, you know, videos minimize abuse by making fun of it or making it seem normal. And Sarnetta does that. A typical example of verbally attacking on another person by name calling or belittling. Sarnetta does that on his show all the time. Sarnetta has anger issues. Uncontrolled and unmanaged rage frequently produces abusive hate behavior. The source of this anger varies, but it is usually tied to some traumatic event. See, Sarnetta has shown over and over again that he's a very psychologically, physically, emotionally, and verbally abused man. Unresolved trauma sparks anger when triggered by a person, circumstance, or place because this anger comes out of nowhere. It that much harder to control and manifest abusively. They grew up with an addict. They maybe have been an addict. And Sarnetta was an addict. He was around addicts. He grew up as an addict. He grew up around addicts. Okay? He used to sell drugs to addicts. An addict blames others for the reason they engage in their destructive behavior, while the victims are often forced to remain silent and acceptant of their behavior. The end result is a lot of pent-up anger and abusive behavior. As an adult, the victim subconsciously speaks out others to blame for their actions. They have control issues. Sarnetta has control issues. Some people like to be in charge. Sarnetta loves to be in charge. He loves to be the boss. In an effort to gain or maintain control of others, they utilize inefficient means of dominance, such as bullying or intimidation, verbal abuse. While forced control can be quickly executed, it does not have lasting qualities. True leadership is void of abusive techniques, Sarnetta. Sarnetta doesn't understand his boundaries. Abusive people tend to lack and understand where they end and where others begin. They see their spouse, friends, children as an extension of themselves, and therefore that person is not entitled to have any boundaries. The lack of distance means a person is subject to whatever the abuser decides. So Sarnetta doesn't know his boundaries. They are afraid. Sarnetta is very afraid. People who do and say things out of fear tend to use their emotions as justification why another person need to do what is demanded. It is as if the fear is so important or powerful that nothing else matters except what is needed to be subdued. Right? Sarnetta lacks empathy. It is far easier to abuse others when there's no empathy for how the victim might feel. Some types of head trauma, personality disorders, or emotional traumas can cause the person to lack the ability to express empathy. Sarnetta has head trauma due to all of the drugs and beaten downs that he has gotten in the streets. He has a personality disorder, which is due to post-traumatic slave syndrome packed on top of being in prison and years and years of drug use. And the environment in Harlem and in penitentiaries has caused this lack of empathy. He has a very, very bad personality disorder. Just because a person has a personality disorder does not mean that they will be abusive. However, the lack of an accurate perception of reality greatly contributes to abusive behavior. And Sarnetta has a great lack of an accurate perception of reality. It greatly contributes to his abusive behavior. If a person is unable to see their behavior as abusive, then they'll keep doing it. And Sarnetta is unable to see his behavior as abusive, and so therefore he keeps doing it. Okay? They are exhausted. When a person reaches the end of a rope, it is not common for them to lash out at whoever is conveniently close. And Sarnetta does this on his show. When you're over there beating down his people, you know, he get exhausted, and then he reaches out and lashes out at you. Now he think of it as a mental. We should think of it when he does that as a meltdown, a mental meltdown. When you over there defeating his opponents or defeating him, and he lash out at him, we should look at it as a mental meltdown where all things stuffed inside come pouring out, usually in a destructive rather than constructive manner. And Sarnetta is very defensive. His defense mechanisms such as denial, projection, regression, and suppression are utilized when a person is backed into a corner. Instead of taking space, Sarnetta come out swinging and retaliate in an abusive manner.